All right, let me tell you a story about how my life went from perfectly fine, or so I thought, to a complete dumpster fire, and all because of one seemingly harmless desire to please everyone. Friends, family, colleagues, even random strangers. I wanted everyone to be happy with me. I figured that was the way to be a good guy, a nice guy, the kind of guy people liked. Ha! Naive much? Looking back, I can see just how clueless I was. It all ended. Well, let's just say it didn't end well. I found myself in a hole so deep climbing out felt impossible. Multiple problems hitting me all at once, trying to juggle everything, and of course, failing spectacularly. That's where it all started. Ready to hear how I messed things up so royally? Buckle up because it's a bumpy ride. I always aimed to be Mr. Perfect, the guy who always had it together, always helpful, always agreeable. Seemed like a noble goal, right? Be kind, be considerate, lend a hand. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? I thought I was building this awesome life, this image of the perfect dude. At work, I was the go-to guy, taking on extra projects, staying late, going above and beyond, even when it meant pushing my own limits. I wanted to be indispensable, the guy everyone could count on. I craved that validation, that pat on the back, that you're the best. But even then, cracks were starting to show. I started to notice that my eagerness to help wasn't seen as a strength, but as a weakness. People started taking advantage, piling more and more work on me with little to no appreciation. My kindness was being mistaken for weakness, and I was too blind to see it. I was becoming a doormat, and everyone was wiping their feet on me. Things at work started to go south pretty quickly. Remember all that extra work I was taking on, all those late nights? Yeah, turns out it wasn't making me look like a superstar. Quite the opposite, actually. My eagerness to help with colleagues' projects backfired spectacularly. My ideas were dismissed, often passed off as someone else's, and I started to look incompetent. How does that even happen? You try to help, and you end up looking like the screw-up. It's like some kind of twisted office karma. And then there was this one colleague, let's call him Mark. We were supposed to be working together. Partners, right? Wrong. Mark was a master manipulator. He figured out that I was a pushover, and he started taking full advantage. I wasn't just doing my own work. I was doing his work too. And not just his, but other colleagues as well. He'd just casually dump their tasks on me like I was some kind of human garbage disposal. And me, being Mr. Nice Guy, I couldn't say no. I was drowning in work, stressed out of my mind, and getting zero credit. Then came the inevitable screw-up. Some minor detail got missed, a deadline wasn't met. Something that wasn't even my fault, but guess who got the blame? Yours truly. I was officially labeled incompetent, unreliable, a liability. I was losing control, fast. It felt like I was trapped in a quicksand of my own making, and the more I struggled, the deeper I sank. Work was a nightmare, but my personal life wasn't exactly a fairy tale either. My girlfriend, let's call her Sarah, well, things with Sarah started to get complicated. At first, everything was great. We were happy, or so I thought, but then she started changing, becoming distant, demanding, manipulative. I didn't see it at first, of course. Mr. Nice Guy was too busy trying to fix things to please her to be the perfect boyfriend. I bent over backward, trying to anticipate her every need, convincing myself that this was just a rough patch, that if I tried hard enough, things would go back to normal. Spoiler alert, they didn't. I was pouring all my energy into this relationship, neglecting my own needs, my own happiness. And what did I get in return? Constant arguments, accusations, and the nagging feeling that I wasn't good enough. I was constantly second-guessing myself, blaming myself for her unhappiness, like I was some kind of emotional punching bag. And then came the knockout blow. She cheated. Turns out, while I was busy bending over backward for her, she was busy with someone else. And not only that, she had the audacity to blame me for it. Said I wasn't attentive enough, that I didn't understand her needs. It was like a slap in the face. The irony was almost unbearable. It was like a bucket of ice water to the face. I finally woke up and saw the reality of the situation. I was being used, manipulated, and played for a fool. This relationship wasn't about love. It was about control. And I was the one being controlled. When I finally mustered up the courage to break up with her, she turned up the manipulation dial to 11. Tried to guilt trip me, make me feel responsible for the whole mess. It was the final straw. The relationship was over and good riddance. So work was a disaster. My relationship imploded, but hey, at least I had my friends, right? Wrong. Turns out Mr. Nice Guy wasn't so popular after all. I'd always prided myself on being a good friend, always there for them no matter what, helping them move, lending them money, listening to their problems. You name it, I did it. I thought I was building these strong, solid friendships, but I was wrong. My kindness, my willingness to always be there, was being taken for granted, and then some. One friend in particular, let's call him John, was a master at exploiting my good nature. He'd constantly ask for favors, big and small, and never so much as said thank you. He'd dump his problems on me, expect me to fix them, and then disappear when I needed something in return. It was a one-way street, and I was the one driving down it alone. At first, I made excuses for him, for all of them. I didn't want to believe that they were taking advantage of me. I wanted to believe that they were genuinely my friends, that they cared about me as much as I cared about them. But the evidence was mounting. They'd call me only when they needed something. They'd cancel plans last minute. They'd talk about me behind my back. The signs were all there, but I was too blind, too invested in maintaining these friendships to see them. I was so afraid of being alone that I clung to these toxic relationships, even though they were draining the life out of me. The final straw came when John asked me to do something that was, let's just say, morally questionable. I finally said no, and that's when the mask came off. He went ballistic, accused me of being a bad friend, of abandoning him. That's when I realized that these weren't friendships at all. They were parasitic relationships, and I was the host. That was the end of that friendship. And honestly, it was a relief. It hurt, sure, but it was a necessary pain. It was the pain of finally cutting off a leech. So there I was, dumped, friendless, and feeling like a complete and utter idiot. My perfect life, the image I'd so carefully constructed, had crumbled around me. I was alone in the most profound sense of the word. It was like being in an emotional vacuum, a silent, empty space where nothing made sense. I was drowning in self-pity, replaying every conversation, every interaction, every decision that had led me to this point. Had I been wrong all along? Was I really the problem? I swung between blaming myself and blaming everyone else. I questioned everything, my judgment, my values, my entire existence. It was an exhausting, agonizing process. But amidst the wreckage, something started to shift. A tiny flicker of realization, a spark of understanding. Maybe, just maybe, my desire to please everyone wasn't so noble after all. Maybe it was, in fact, the root of all my problems. I started to see a pattern. The more I tried to please others, the more they took advantage of me. The more I gave, the less I received. The more I tried to be the nice guy, the more I got walked all over. It was a slow, painful realization, but it was a necessary one. I had to face the uncomfortable truth. My desire to please everyone had turned me into a doormat, a pushover, a people pleaser of epic proportions. And the worst part? I had done it to myself. I had built this prison of niceness, and now I was trapped inside. It was time to break free. As I started picking up the pieces of my shattered life, I began to see manipulators everywhere. It was like I'd suddenly developed a radar for them. And it wasn't just my ex and my so-called friends. It was family members, colleagues, even acquaintances. People I'd known for years, people I'd trusted, people I'd bent over backward for. They'd all been playing me, using my niceness to their advantage. It was a sobering realization. They'd perfected the art of making me feel guilty, obligated, responsible for their problems. They'd play the victim, tug at my heartstrings, and before I knew it, I'd be agreeing to do something I didn't want to do, something that inconvenienced me, something that ultimately benefited them and only them. They were masters of emotional blackmail, and I was their willing accomplice. They knew my weaknesses, my insecurities, my deep-seated need to be liked, and they exploited them ruthlessly. They'd create these scenarios where I couldn't say no without feeling like a monster. It was a vicious cycle, and I was trapped in the middle. I started to feel like a puppet, my strings being pulled by everyone around me. My sense of self, my own needs and desires were completely lost in the noise of everyone else's demands. I was a shell of a person, a walking, talking, people-pleasing machine. It was exhausting, demoralizing, and frankly, infuriating. How had I let this happen? How had I become so blind to the manipulation, so willing to be used? The answer, I realized, was simple. I was terrified of being alone, of being rejected, of not being liked. And that fear had made me the perfect target. I thought I'd hit rock bottom after the breakup and losing my friends. I was wrong. There was another level of low waiting for me. It came in the form of a seemingly innocent request from my sister. She needed help with something that required a significant time commitment and a fair bit of emotional labor. Normally, I wouldn't have hesitated, but something had changed in me. The constant manipulation, the betrayals, the loneliness, it had all taken a toll. I was tired, emotionally drained, and frankly, I just didn't want to do it. So, for the first time in my life, I said no, and the world didn't end. In fact, nothing much happened at all. My sister was a little surprised, a little disappointed, but she accepted my refusal. No guilt trip, no drama, no accusations. It was anticlimactic. And that's when it hit me. The power of no. It was such a small word, but it held so much weight. It was the key to unlocking my freedom, to reclaiming my life. This no wasn't just about my sister's request, it was about everything. It was about refusing to be manipulated, refusing to be used, refusing to be a people pleaser. It was about finally putting myself first. This seemingly insignificant incident was the catalyst for a major shift in my thinking. It was the last straw, the final push I needed to break free from the chains of people-pleasing. It was the beginning of my journey back to myself. Saying no to my sister was empowering, but it also had some unexpected consequences. Word got around that I wasn't Mr. Nice Guy anymore, that I was actually capable of saying no. And some people didn't like it. Some of my remaining friends started to distance themselves. They didn't call as often, they didn't invite me out, and when I did see them, there was a noticeable coolness in their demeanor. It was clear they missed the old me, the pushover, the guy they could always count on to say yes. They missed the guy they could use. It stung, of course. It's never easy to lose friends, even if those friendships were built on a foundation of manipulation and convenience. But honestly, it was also a relief. It was like pruning a dead branch off a tree. These weren't real friends. They were emotional vampires, sucking the life out of me. And now they were gone. It was painful, yes, but it was also liberating. I was finally free from the pressure of maintaining these toxic relationships. I was free to focus on myself, on building genuine connections with people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. It was a lonely time, for sure, but it was also a time of growth, a time of self-discovery. I was learning to be alone, to be comfortable in my own skin, to be okay with not being liked by everyone. And that, I realized, was a much more valuable lesson than any I'd learned while trying to please everyone. Saying no became my new mantra. It was like a muscle I'd never used before, and it was weak and shaky at first. But with practice, it got stronger. I started small, saying no to minor requests, things that didn't really matter. Then I gradually worked my way up to bigger things that actually made a difference. It wasn't easy. There were times when I felt guilty, when I worried about hurting people's feelings, when I second-guessed myself. But I kept at it. I reminded myself that saying no wasn't selfish, it was self-preservation. It was about setting boundaries, protecting my time and energy, and prioritizing my own well-being. And you know what? The world didn't end. In fact, most people were surprisingly understanding. Sure, there were a few who got upset, who accused me of being selfish, who tried to guilt trip me. But I held my ground. I'd learned my lesson. People pleasing leads to resentment, burnout, and a whole lot of unhappiness. Saying no wasn't just about setting boundaries with others, it was about setting boundaries with myself. It was about learning to respect my own limits, to value my own time, to prioritize my own needs. It was about finally putting myself first, and that, my friends, was a game changer. Just when I thought I had a handle on this whole saying no thing, life threw me a curveball. My mom got sick. It wasn't anything serious, but she needed help. A lot of help. And everyone expected me to step up. My siblings, my extended family, even some of my old friends. They all assumed I'd be the one to take care of her. And honestly, a part of me wanted to. I loved my mom, and I wanted to be there for her. But another part of me, the part that had been working so hard to establish boundaries, hesitated. I knew that if I said yes, I'd be falling back into old patterns. I'd be putting my own life on hold, sacrificing my own needs, and becoming everyone's emotional crutch. It was the ultimate test. Could I say no, even to my own mother? I wrestled with the decision for days. I felt guilty, selfish, like a terrible son. But I also knew that I couldn't go back to being the person I used to be. I couldn't sacrifice my own well-being for the sake of others, even family. So, with a heavy heart, I said no. I explained to my family that I couldn't take on the full responsibility of caring for my mom, but I offered to help in other ways. I suggested a rotating schedule where each sibling would take a turn caring for her. It wasn't what they wanted, but they accepted it. It was a difficult conversation, filled with tension and emotion, but I stood my ground. And you know what? It was okay. My mom got the care she needed, and I was able to support her without completely sacrificing my own life. It was a win-win. It was proof that saying no didn't make me a bad person. It made me a healthier person, a person with boundaries, a person who was finally in control of his own life.